It was an ordinary evening. Streetlights were on, radios played, kettles boiled. Then the lights went out. No warning, no noise, just a pause. Streets fell quiet, houses darkened. The power hadn't failed. It had been turned off. At first, it felt like a fault, a technical issue, something temporary. But this wasn't a blackout. Nothing had broken. The grid was intact. Power stations stood ready. This was not failure. The lights were off because they were meant to be. Britain was built to run, not to pause, not to wait. Power didn't just light homes. It set the rhythm. Factories opened on schedule. Offices filled at the same hour. Shifts changed on time. Everything depended on movement, and movement depended on power. There was no slack in the system, no margin for delay. Efficiency wasn't a risk, it was the design. The limits came quietly. Power was available, but only at certain times. Some machines stayed idle, others waited for their window. Factories adjusted first. Shifts were shortened. Production slowed, not because demand disappeared, but because hours were missing. Offices followed. Early closures became routine. Work stacked up. Decisions waited for light. Then transport felt the change. Timetables slipped. Routes were reduced. Connections stopped lining up. Nothing failed all at once. The system simply lost its timing. For most people, the change arrived slowly. Evenings ended earlier. Shops closed before usual. Streets emptied sooner than expected. At home, routines adjusted. Meals were planned around light. Radios stayed on longer. Candles returned to tables. Families gathered in the same room, not out of fear, but convenience. Children finished homework early. Conversations lasted longer. Cities grew quieter, not because people were afraid, but because there was nowhere else to go. Life continued, just at a slower pace. By then, the response was unavoidable. Emergency measures were introduced. Power was prioritized. Hospitals, power stations, food depots. Schedules were rewritten. Exceptions were granted. Instructions moved faster than electricity ever could. But the system wasn't built for manual control. It relied on timing, not commands. You can issue orders. You can set priorities. You can ration supply. But you cannot replace millions of daily decisions overnight. Every adjustment solved one problem and created another. Then, little by little, it shifted. A few hours were added back. A few places stayed open longer. Lights returned to some streets, not all of them. Work resumed, but with gaps. People stopped watching clocks and started watching patterns. Not, when will it be fixed, but, will it last tonight? Movements became cautious. Plans stayed provisional. The country didn't snap back. It learned to move carefully. And once you learn that, normal never feels the same. By now, things appeared normal. Shops opened. Buses ran. Lights came on. But the rhythm had changed. People arrived early, just in case. Workdays ended sooner, without complaint. Conversations became practical. Plans included margins. Meetings avoided late hours. Deliveries arrived earlier than needed. Everything was timed to finish, not to continue. Cities learned to expect interruption. Silence no longer felt unusual. It felt prepared for. Nothing seemed broken. Nothing felt guaranteed. The system was running again. Trust was not. We often imagine collapse as something sudden, loud, obvious. But complex systems rarely fail that way. They slow down. They lose margin. They stop absorbing delay. Small interruptions begin to matter. Minor weights start to multiply. Time, once invisible, becomes the main constraint. What happened here wasn't about power alone. It was about dependency. When everything is timed precisely, even a small pause spreads outward. Supply waits, services hesitate, decisions stack up, nothing breaks, nothing explodes. Things simply arrive too late, and when timing fails, function quietly follows. Work still exists, demand remains, but coordination slips out of reach. Efficiency makes systems productive. It also makes them narrow. Remove movement, and there is no buffer to fall back on. This wasn't a warning delivered with force. It was delivered quietly through delay. Britain didn't collapse. It didn't fail. It paused. And in that pause, something became visible. The country still existed. Homes stood. Roads remained. Power returned. But movement no longer felt guaranteed. People adjusted without being told. Journeys were planned with caution. Assumptions were checked twice. The idea of on time quietly changed its meaning. The certainty that carried daily life had quietly slipped away. Nothing dramatic marked the moment. No announcement, no final signal. Just a change in how absence was understood. The system resumed. Confidence did not. And once that balance shifts, it rarely moves back in the same way. Long after the lights stayed on, the memory remained. Not as a story people told, but as a habit they kept. A tendency to leave earlier, to finish things sooner, to notice silence before it arrived. The systems recovered, the schedules stabilized. Daily life returned to something familiar. But expectations had shifted. Movement was no longer assumed. It was noticed. And once something that basic becomes visible, it rarely disappears again. The pause passed. The mark it left did not.